Hi, I'm Samantha Murphy, and for my research presentation, I wanted to explore the idea of how religion and other spiritual beliefs are reflected through symbolism in either the fairy tales, folk tales, or myths of a culture. So, what is the connection between symbolism and religion? Radically diverse, opposing ideas, and also revolutionary thought have always been major contributing factors when defining a religion, and the definition of what constitutes a religious tradition is always changing. However, the ideas of symbolism and religion are very often intertwined. From ideas of using the body as a cultural symbol to say things about society, to the anthropologist Fiona Bowie's viewpoint that pilgrimage is related to the ideas of people, places, and objects, symbolism is embedded in the hearts of many religions. So how do religious symbols play a role in fairy tales, folk tales, and myths? According to the article Symbolism and Values, Rationality and Irrationality of a Culture by Raymond Pakika of Bokyo University in Kyoto, Japan, he writes that values are treated as factors that explain behavior, self, and society, or are considered as guides or measures of behavior useful for enhancement of self-esteem as well as for social integration, and that the values are then taught through the use of symbolism within a cultural context, ideally through the use of language, because language itself is a system of representation, substitution, and association, and can therefore be seen as a prototype of symbolism, including cultural stories. Current definitions of religion also contributed to the significance of the cultural tales of a society. For example, one of the more widely accepted definitions of religion was suggested by contemporary American anthropologist Clifford Geertz. Geertz defined religion, as he explained it, through a symbolist approach, explaining that religion is made up of 5 elements. First, he explains that religion is a system of symbols which as to establish powerful, persuasive, and long-lasting moods and motivation in men by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions in such a way in aura of facility that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. And it can be argued that this definition supports the religious symbolism presented in Madame Le Prince de Beaumont's version of Beauty and the Beast. As some background, the Madame Le Prince de Beaumont version of Beauty and the Beast is similar and yet very different from the version notably done by Walt Disney. First published in France in 1756, the tale takes place once upon a time and begins on describing the elaborate life of a wealthy trading merchant, wealthy enough to support the lavish life of his 6 children, 5 of which spends their days attending royal balls and visiting the theater, while the youngest child, named Beauty, prefers to spend much of her time wrapped in a good book. However, the story continues that the family ultimately loses their fortune and is forced to move to a small cottage in the countryside, with Beauty being the only member of the family content with the change. Fortunately, after some time living in the country, the father is given the opportunity to regain the family's fortune, and he asks the children what gifts they would like upon his return. Unlike her other siblings, Beauty only asks her father for a rose which faithfully the father finds at the castle of the Beast, and after becoming lost in a snowstorm. Infuriated, the Beast goes to take the father prisoner. However, similar to the Disney version, Beauty takes her father's place instead. However, different from the Disney version, where the enchanted rose was tracking the Beast's time as a monster, the rose in Madame Le Prince de Beaumont's version served as a small and yet crucial factor for the opening of the story. However, unlike more modernized versions of the fairy tale, this is the end of the significance of the rose. The fairy tale continues to reveal how Beauty learned to love her Beast, breaking the curse and having a fairy transport them to the prince's realm to be married. But other scholars believe that the rose in the 1756 version of the fairy tale may argue that it has religious significance. The article, Beauty and the Beast, Fairy Tales as Mythical Texts, with Simone Weil and Cristina Campo, is a commentary and an analysis of a work done by Weil and Campo. The article focuses on the question of God the princess or God the monster within the tale of Beauty and the Beast, using the rose as a main example. Mazzoni's article emphasizes on Campo's idea that the rose in the fairy tale could either be the embodiment of belle beauty, signaling praise to a higher power and asking for a miracle, and or displaying virtuous and innocence of her character, or that because the story is set during winter time, the rose could embody the idea of vanity and greed. On the other hand, religious symbolism not only takes the form of icons and totems in fairy tales, but in the text The Anthropology of Religion and Introduction, author Fiona Bowie argues that the body can be used as a religious and cultural symbol as well, giving rise to the idea that characters themselves can hold religious symbolism within folk tales. Furthermore, cultural anthropologist Melford Shapiro, who also emphasized the idea that religion was driven through a symbolist ideology, argued that religious tradition is an institution consisting of postulated superhuman beings. These two ideas presented by Bowie and Shapiro are reminiscent of the religious symbolism presented in the Bhagavad Gita. Also, as some background, the Bhagavad Gita is a classic text in Hindu culture. As an excerpt from the Mahabharata, another classic epic of the Hindu religious tradition, the text centers on the warrior prince Arjuna as he faces great moral conflict in the face of war. The epic also goes on to explain how the Hindu god Krishna, an avatar of Vishnu, uses teachings of yoga to aid Arjuna through his struggle, in essence, teaching him the ways of the gods in order to succeed. For example, the first teaching that Krishna bestows on Arjuna is the idea that yoga is equanimity. As the time for war approaches, Arjuna becomes anticipatory with all the aspects associated with conflict. The Bhagavad Gita depicts Arjuna in a mental state of distress as he speaks with Krishna. Krishna then explains to Arjuna that he needs to be steadfast, while also relinquishing attachment and performing actions with impartiality, teaching Arjuna that future yogic scholars that by releasing mental distractions and leading towards a life of mental calmness, one is following the path of yoga. Furthermore, also in the article Symbolism and Values, Rationally and Irrationally of Culture, Pakika makes it clearly noted that the symbolized values of cultural texts are values inherent in action itself. Adopting the proposition implies that by acting and experimenting, people find out what is useful or effective for realizing goals and what is satisfying in terms of experience. The crucial point here is that the value is inherent in the act. It is its own reward. The experience is gratifying, tends to be repeated, and then becomes a habit. Thus, further solidifying the idea that the yogic practice that Krishna is teaching Arjuna is meant to be a symbolic lesson for future scholars of the Bhagavad Gita. And finally, one of the last reasons why religious symbolism is important within fairy tales, folk tales, and myths is the idea around symbols being personal and cultural. Also in the book, The Anthropology of Religion and Introduction, Fiona Bowie points out three aspects that make a symbol personal for an individual. First, the idea that the symbol is optional for an individual. For example, body piercings are optional in Western society. Second, is that a personal symbol is recognized by a culture of a person concerned as meaningful, rational, objective, and normal. And finally, that personal symbols are psychologically relevant to an individual. For example, work done by the Sri Lankan anthropologist Gananath Obayansky in his work Medusa's Hair. As to background, Medusa is one of the Gorgons, or female monsters of Greek mythology, and her hair is so dense as snakes that if you were to look directly into it, you would turn to stone. Now, Medusa's Hair is the book was written by Sri Lankan cultural anthropologist Gananath Obayansky. In his book, Obayansky used the example of the matted snake-like hair of female aesthetics in Sri Lanka to show the importance of individual symbolism. He explained that the rest of the society thought the matted hair of the females was repulsive, and that the reaction of the public did not bother the individual female aesthetics. By using this well-known Greek myth to Medusa to relate the woman to in Sri Lanka, we can see how mystical and religious symbolism plays a dominant role with identifying an identifying individualism within a culture, and also how fairy tales, folk tales, and myths become a necessary part in spreading the ideas of religious symbolism.